But I had a professor in college that actually told us, he was just like, hey, all of these skills that you guys are learning, don't forget, like, they are transferable outside of the games industry.
Hi everyone, my name is Mish, and I head content and communications here at Duality. And today we're starting a new project for us. We're going to be interviewing talented folks who work here with us at Duality and finding out a little bit about what they do and how they use Falcon in their job. Here with me is also Rebecca Bogdanov, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself.
Hey, my name's Rebecca. I'm the community lead here at Duality, so I'm a little bit like the liaison between the company and the Duality community. I also make sure that the EDU content and help content that we have fits your needs. So I'm really excited about this interview because hopefully it'll kind of expand people's horizons about what's possible with this software.
And today we're kicking this off with talking with Travis Kehler, who is a technical artist here. And Travis, why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit what is a technical artist?
Hi, my name is Travis Kehler, and I'm a technical artist here at Duality. A technical artist is a little bit vague, but I build complex worlds and complex systems. I have a background in environmental art and props. Technical artist is a little bit of a loaded term. There's many different things that it can be, but I like to think of it as a liaison between tech and art.
Great. Did you always want to work in simulation? Like, was that always the plan for you?
No, so I actually originally wanted to do graphic design. Um, and before that, I worked in construction and I worked at a warehouse. And then I decided I was going to go to college for graphic design.
Very cool. It's funny because with the warehouse part, that's actually even relevant to kind of what Duality is doing now.
I
Yeah,
was thinking about that as well.
very much.
And so when you went to college, what did you actually study?
Yeah, so I started out in a graphics major, graphic design major, and then I met a friend who showed me a 3D modeling software. And I was just playing around with it, and he was like, you could transfer to the game art uh, curriculum. If you want, you could try that. And soon enough, a month later, I was in the game art program, and then the rest is kind of history. So I majored in game art and design at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh.
Very cool. Were you a gamer before you started doing that? Was that a part of your life?
Yeah, yeah. So I was a gamer, and I definitely get picked on, or I used to get picked on. Working at game studios. Like, I didn't play games as much as the other people. you know. So I would definitely get picked on a little bit for that.
I think most of us can kind of relate to that part for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh, and so how you studied game art, game design, and I'm assuming what you were at that time trying to do is work on creating games. Is that what you did with your degree after you graduated?
Yeah. So I think it was a few months before I graduated. Actually, going back a little bit, we actually had a class. I forget what the class was called, um, but we had to go and get an internship, or we had to do something else, right? So I ended up getting an internship at a studio called Easily Done Studios, and it was mobile gaming. So I interned there, and then I worked there for a while. Um, and then towards the end of my degree, I went and interviewed at Shell Games, and soon enough, I got the job before I was out of college.
It's a pretty competitive world, and I don't know if it was. I know even more so now, but like I imagine
Mm.
even when you're graduating, that's not a small thing. So you did that. You got to the point where you're like, great, got a degree in game development, game art. Were there specific tools that you were really gravitating towards when you were doing this? Were there specific skill sets you were bringing to your work in the game world?
Yeah. So when I got hired initially, or with my early work, a lot of it was environmental art and it was prop art. And soon that put me into the role of world building, right? And that kind of followed up with optimization, and that's not necessarily a job title, but it kind of goes hand in hand with world building. and especially depending on the platforms you're working on. So we were working on mobile devices. Soon enough, we were working on VR devices. You can build all these things for PC, but when you want them to run on these other devices, you really need to know the ins and outs of optimization.
Were there specific game engines you were working on? Was there something that you were specializing in, or are you pretty broad in your expertise?
Uh, I didn't realize it for a while, but I was tending towards more broad. Um, what is it? It was means to an end, was always the excuse, right? So there were certain areas where I would get into coding um, as a means to an end, and it was always for making tools for myself to be more efficient. A lot of the software that I would use would be Maya or 3ds Max. Nowadays I use Blender, and that's for modeling, right? And then you could use ZBrush for sculpting, and then Substance Designer for texturing, all of that. But all of this would be for Unreal or Unity, right? So it was all game engine focused.
So that sounds great. So you found yourself in this place where you are doing world building for all these different platforms and doing it on a more technical level in general with optimization. But that still seems like a little whiles away from doing what you do now, the technical artist part of it. How did you start moving in that direction?
So I think it's kind of similar to what I was saying before, where it was constantly a means to an end. So you get to the point of world building, optimization, and then you start looking at lighting, right? And you constantly keep getting these different layers of the cake, on top. And my curiosity still kept going, right? Over the 7 years that I was at Shell Games, there would be these different elements that would stack. I'd be reaching my hands into different elements of the pipeline. So there would be effects, there would be lighting, right? That optimization, that world building, all these different elements. And then as they come together, right, this is where you start to become a technical artist, right? Which is why I kind of say technical artist is kind of vague. It's a little bit of a general term. We kind of say generalist. So I say that I am an advanced generalist in a way. That's what this technical artist role is, right? Just an advanced generalist.
Do you enjoy doing a specialized task more, or do you enjoy more this role where you get to do lots of different things?
I mean, the simple answer to that is specialized roles can become redundant and a little boring. Um, that's a little frank. Sorry. But the generalized role, it really opens you up to all this different R&D where you could potentially learn something new, and then now you have that weapon in your arsenal, to bring towards another project. And so I definitely like the generalization a lot more versus specializing.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of us, especially working at a startup, can really, really relate to that. There's definitely that thirst for constant new things, and that sometimes you also may regret it. But
Could you imagine if you were one of those people that had to do the outlines for segmentation all the time?
That's all you did every day, all day?
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. So there seems to be a pretty clear parallel between your work in the video game industry. We're building, creating environments with what we do at Duality, which a lot of it is building digital twins of environments, of real world locations very often that are meant to be as high fidelity and very faithful to the real environments. Um, but how did you find yourself at Duality? Were there other steps before that getting into simulation, or was that a very kind of direct transition?
So there's a few different steps. So while I was still at that game studio, there was a myriad of projects, that we would work on, and not all of them would be video games. Some of them would be, hey, here's a museum, right? We want to set stuff up, or this is a dig site. Here's some photogrammetry. How can you adjust that, and make it work in VR, that kind of thing. So there was some experience there, but it was around COVID that I transitioned, sort of looking um, at some other jobs, and there was a company that reached out to me, or there was a subcontractor that reached out to me for BETIS. It is the Naval Nuclear Laboratory. And without going into too much detail, they were working on simulations for submarines, right? Um, and that is a combination of environmental stuff, interactive elements, um, and training, right? So I think I worked there for about a year, and everyone likes different work routines. That one I could tell was definitely going to grind me. You know, I think it was like 10 or 12 hour days. You know, for four days, so you get 3 days off. You know, that kind of thing. It was definitely a little tedious, but it was sometime after a year. Um, Mike reached out to me um, personally, and I didn't know him. I didn't even believe it. You know, I was just like, this seems like a scam. I don't know about this. And he was like, I found you through your YouTube channel. I'm like, okay, we can have a video call, and then with that, the rest is history. You know, so I signed on to Duality and started working on projects.
Man, YouTube, like you could not overstate what a useful tool it is for creators of any kind.
Yeah.
Like it really opens doors.
It also illustrates that point of like choosing to do extra things can get you those roles. Like that YouTube wasn't part of your job, but
Yeah,
that was something that was extra that you were just investing in yourself and that ended up being fruitful for later.
yeah, and it
100%.
wasn't. You know, my goal originally with that wasn't entirely like, hey, let's make $5 extra. You know, it wasn't anything like that. It was both how can I teach people something and how can I improve my communication? You know,
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily the best on camera, and sometimes I repeat myself. You know, so it's a good exercise for me personally.
100% beg to differ about your presence on camera. And the other part of it is, yeah, like 100%. Like I think a lot of us in careers that are, a little bit different from what's kind of known immediately when you graduate from school or from college, find that like, oh, there's little things you do, and then they completely change your
Yeah.
understanding of what's possible, what your path can be.
Yeah. Especially if you're interested in it, you
Absolutely.
like it. It's not like draining, like you were talking about how you
Yeah.
like to learn. It's like very similar.
Yeah.
For sure.
I did have a question about your transition from working at a gaming studio to working on a project that was simulation. Can you talk about whether that was an easy transition, hard transition, like apart from the long work hours, right? Which is no fun. But as far as like the actual work, how was that transition?
There is a lot of overlap between the simulation robotics world and the game industry, starting with meetings, right? There's a lot of meetings that falls under communication. Um, and then there's just a lot of engine work, that needs to be done. You know, you have different systems that you need to build. There's different systems that I build, different shader work, and then you still have all that modeling, all of that texturing, and all of that animation that needs to be done. Um, in some cases, you may not be making this stuff manually. Maybe it's a procedural process, or you might be getting something from a marketplace to kind of shortcut that process. So you can focus on the pipeline, and getting something done, something in first. But yeah, all of those skills are directly transferable. I would say that in the simulation world, it's a combination of um, games and software development, right? So there's a little bit of a learning curve to the software side of things. You do have engineers, in the games industry, um, but a lot of the people in simulation, they're coming at it from an angle of software development.
I'm curious also, is like obviously the big difference that you could easily say between simulation and game development is the subject of what you're working on. So for you going from like, hey, I'm working in, fictional sort of stories, worlds, etc., then moving to like, oh, every project I work on now is something that happens in the real world, right? Like it's something that actually
Yeah.
has that physical impact. Does that play into your perception of your job, your day-to-day sort of feelings about your job or anything like that?
So it absolutely does. And this isn't to steer anyone away. and it's not that it takes any of the creativity out of it, right? If you still like building and creating things, this is definitely for you. But the stylization side of stuff isn't here as much. There may be some special circumstances that we get into that, but a lot of this is geared towards realism. So if you do have a passion for realism, at least as like a ground truth, this is definitely a place that you'll find a home in. And everything isn't necessarily just geared towards realism. Some of it is geared towards abstract and it's data driven. How do we represent different surfaces? How do we represent something like a heat map for infrared?
So it sounds like part of working in this, like you've had to start learning a lot of things about the real world that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise because you wouldn't have had a reason to explore some of those phenomena.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much that you learn certain things in like middle school, high school, right? That you kind of forget about, you put on the back burner, right? And then all of a sudden you're broached with this question of, hey, how does heat work, right? Something simple like that. And then you have to come up with an idea or a solution to how can I make these shaders interact or represent heat in the way that we need to hand it off to something.
Great. Like that actually really leads us in sort of my next question here, which is what have been some of your favorite or most interesting projects that you've gotten to work on at Duality?
Oh man. Um, there's two at the opposite ends of my career here so far. Um, the first one of the early ones that I worked on was telephone poles. um, and the whole purpose of this was to try and teach drones uh, about broken telephone poles. Because there's people that go out there every day, to inspect these telephone poles manually, you know. But actually building that system out was a lot of fun, right? So we have various telephone poles that we'd have to create, and then we have to have different states of broken, right? Which ends up being a significant variety, and how do you make that more procedural so that you only build a certain set of objects, and then those can turn into thousands, tens of thousands of variations, so that we could train these drones to try and inspect these telephone poles. So that's one. I call it the telephone project. Um, and then more recently, we have some space projects, and I don't know about how much detail I can go to with those, but who wouldn't like to work on a space project?
Yeah, it does seem that, specifically because one of the things we try to do is to create data for situations where real world data is just really hard to get. Man, like I can't think of a harder place than space, and pretty awesome that you kind of get to create that for folks.
Yeah.
It's a lot
And
of
very
fun.
important to figure out all the logistics before we actually, before someone's up there or like millions and millions of dollars of equipment is up there. Like that's key use of simulation.
And I mean, those are two examples of very different projects, and I think next on what I would add to next on the list would be a lot of our GIS projects, right? Like that has been maybe 2 years in the making, and it's still growing, right? How efficient that is. But we have a pipeline to build out these worlds from a location, so we can get the environment, the terrain, and then we can process satellite information and we can turn the surfaces into correct materials, and then we can place buildings in correct locations. And that's still evolving, but that is another one I'm also very excited about.
Does that feel like a superpower that you're like, hey, I could pick a location on a map and like that quickly have a 3D world that just is
Oh,
kind of
oh
born from it?
yes, yeah. And that is an example of being a technical artist, but also working with a team, right? Um, that's something that probably used to take us like a month, maybe longer. And now we kind of have the pipeline down to like an hour, right? Just a certain facet of it, and there's so much more to build with. So working with a team is, I don't know, it's important to me.
When you started this role that as a technical artist, what are some of the skills that were the most transferable from what you knew before to what you're doing now?
Oh, sure. 3D modeling, um, shader work, engine work, um, coding, a certain amount of C++ knowledge, some Python knowledge. Like, I would say that those were all very transferable. I think the toughest thing and enjoyable thing, it used to go back and forth, was learning about the different jargon. Right, I did not come from a robotics world. I didn't know a lot of this stuff. Like, everyone has a car, and these newer cars have sensors, but you don't really think about it, right? But it was definitely a little bit of a learning curve where all of a sudden someone would talk about a very specific sensor, but they would name it, and you're like, wait, what is that? What is an AO sensor? What?
So it sounds like a lot of the learning of new things was about sort of the terminology, the jargon of the industries, and obviously you work in different industries. Like it's not just robotics. There's different kind of customers that we have. Are there skills that you've had to learn, like to be successful at your job, or to make your job, easier or more effective?
I have had to learn a lot more about systems, right? Especially on this robotic side, or even on the software side of things. We do use a lot of different software at our company. Different individuals use various software, and as someone might implement them into our pipelines, we have to pick that up, and learn about it. Esri comes to mind, as an example. It's like, oh man, that's a new software. How does that work? Miniconda, right? It's just like, hey, what's the language here? How does it differ? You know, yeah.
To be an effective technical artist for your role, like, how much did you have to learn about synthetic data or actual like trading AI? Obviously, most of what you're doing is often used for that purpose. So I'm curious how that affects you in your role.
There's a lot of other people at the company that their focus is more on the synthetic data, and my focus is more on generating the content effectively and building systems effectively that will help make the synthetic data. So I've my toes are dipped into that world, and I will continue to submerge myself into it um, as we go on.
So it sounds like kind of you mentioned before, like how important it is to work with the team and that it's not sort of you on your own. It sounds like there's a lot of like a feedback loop between, hey, this is what we're making on the like you as a technical artist on that
Yeah,
level, and what is it that I need to make that can then produce good synthetic data or useful synthetic data.
that's exactly it. Like, there are so many facets here at Duality, or even just working in simulation, that I would say you could do it by yourself. Uh, it might not be enjoyable. Working as a team is very important. Every now and then there might be some moment where someone's like, "You don't know that," but generally, if you just say, "Hey, what is that?" or "I don't know," in a genuine way, uh, it's received pretty well. And someone will help you out and describe what it is, and then you can meet them in the middle, right? All of a sudden, you're speaking the same language.
Yes, that because I found that it's such a interesting overlap of skills, this area of work, that it tends to be that what is clear and simple to one person from their field is not clear and simple to someone else.
I have learned that. I've been told that a few times. I'm like, what?
Man, we keep on finding such like perfect segues because the next thing I want to ask you, and we're gonna get into these a little bit of, um, how do you communicate these things? How do you understand these things in a way? And I'm assuming from what you were saying that before joining Duality, you didn't know too much about digital twins and simulation. So I'm curious if you had to explain digital twins and simulation now to Travis of pre-duality, like how would you explain that?
So what's nice is once you understand what's going on, it's not too dissimilar from anything else. At the bare minimum, I would say it's digitally replicating something. So, like this coffee mug, right? You make a 3D version of it. That's a digital twin. Um, some people would take it as far as a system, right? Maybe you have a fan that's turning, right? So that's a system as a digital twin. I think that's how I would describe it to a younger version of myself. Yeah.
Would it be like for folks coming just from the 3D modeling world, like if you take the example of your coffee mug, that it would be like this is a digital twin if you just have the mesh of it, or does it need more information to be a digital twin? Like, are there other parts of it that are important?
Sure. I would say that it definitely needs to have more properties than just the model. You need it to actually have the texturing, the correct material properties. If it's chipped, right, you want it to have that correct chip in it. And then just the same, that fan as an example, you would want it to animate correctly like a normal fan. Maybe even going as far as the behavior of the fan. Maybe the fan's not on, but what happens if a gust of wind comes by? Does it turn a little bit?
So it seems like the physics is also important. Like that mug, for example, then would need to have a proper weight, mass, that kind of stuff as well to it, which you might
That's
not
right.
need as much in the video game world in a way.
It's definitely not as video game, that's for sure. There's definitely a lot more demand in this industry.
What I'm
Got it.
also hearing is that people might be creating digital twins without really thinking of them as that, like 3D artists and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. People have probably made digital twins and not really realized it.
Cool. So the last sort of question I kind of had about your work really here is Falcon's the tool itself, right? Because like you told us before about, the things you were learning as you were getting into game development. And then at Duality, we're building Falcon. That's it definitely combines several tools into one in a way. Um, for you, what are the unique and interesting things that you're able to do with Falcon? And how does that in any way change your understanding of 3D tools in general?
I would say that Falcon definitely makes it so much easier to bring our digital twins together, an environment, a character, and just start to add those extra sensors on there. Creating a scenario is pretty easy. It's kind of the only way to do it. But you create a scenario and you have your environment, you have your character, sensor, whatever you want to be a sensor. You just bring those together. Here's this thing, and then you can add your sensors, whatever you need for outputting data, and you're ready to go. You can just output data from there. It's really, really easy, and choosing between twins, importing new twins, creating a twin, those are also relatively pretty easy and pretty fast to do.
Do you have any advice, thoughts to share with 3D graphics or kind of comp sci majors who are working in the game development, or maybe finishing their degrees in that, who are maybe thinking like, ooh, like, what is it that I want to do next? Do I want to pursue game development? Do I want to try something like a technical artist? Any kind of thoughts of your own that maybe you would want to communicate to folks
Yeah.
thinking about a career like that?
Kind of
Yeah.
piggybacking on that as well, if there's any advantages that you find in pursuing this specific field.
I mean, I would definitely say, follow your passion, follow your interests for sure, right? Try and take a road of least resistance to begin with. But if technical art is something that you want to get into, um, it's something that you should be practicing often, right? You should be working on these uh, different systems. You should be researching things like materials, material properties, how do they work, and you should be getting into more advanced things in regards to materials, um, render targets. How do we utilize masks? What are different ways that you can represent data and leverage that data? That's really what it comes down to. Um, Manipulating data to your to what you want it to do.
That's pretty clear. I think that gives a pretty good kind of path for folks who are interested to explore at least what they might be interested in. To those who may not be familiar, we actually just recently launched our EDU tier that's actually specifically aimed at putting Falcon in the hands of anyone who wants to explore digital twin simulation and actually learn how to create synthetic data to train AI, to train other smart systems. And you can explore that today. It's kind of available for everyone. Do you have anything to add about that, Rebecca?
Yeah, so we also created learning pathways so that if you're just an individual and want to, like we talked about earlier, you want to develop interests or skills on your own apart from either your work or your school, we've set it up that way so that you on your own would be able to navigate through the learning material easily and be able to learn how to use simulation to create data for specific purposes, like Travis was talking about. And also, if you're interested in AI, it's walking you through how to use that specifically for training AI, which at a base level, like understanding how AI is trained and how it functions, I think is very useful in this modern world. Um, so we've designed that to both teach you about simulation and also AI on your own. And also, this is something that would be easily transferable to a classroom as well. Like we've designed it for the individual to walk through, but also for a teacher who wants to use it in a class, they would easily be able to pull that information and incorporate it into their classroom.
Fantastic. And anyone, can get started very easily. It's easy to find. It's just at duality.ai/edu. So you can head on over there and actually start using it today. So as we're wrapping up here, Travis, wanted to kind of know just if you have any outlook sort of on the future of like this type of career path. Like, do you see technical art evolving? Do you see it as a more needed skill, or kind of how you're thinking about
Yeah, specifically for simulation.
Yeah. So for simulation and robotics, I see it as a frontier right now. Um, get in while you can. Um, it's probably going to be like this for a while. Like I've described a little bit of what my job role is now, but I'm not sure it will be exactly the same a year from now, right? There's probably going to be many different facets, or there's going to be a new learning curve. So yeah, it's a frontier.
if you were talking to Travis, who is like graduating from school, like knowing where you've ended up, are you like, ooh, I have some advice for you, how, like what you should do is dating? Or you're like, nope, you did everything right, which is great. And I hope more of us can say that.
No, no. I would probably give myself some advice like, hey, this is where you're going to end up. Um, you may not have thought you would, but you did. I think I may have told you guys this once before, but I had a professor in college that actually told us, he was just like, hey, all of these skills that you guys are learning, don't forget, like they are transferable outside of the games industry. And I actually had a few friends. One friend went to work at UPMC, medical hospital, and he was just sculpting different anatomical parts, so all of those skills are transferable. I think I would, if I had to talk to myself many years ago, I would remind myself that that is very, very true.
I think it can
Uh,
be scary to branch out. So I think it's one of the nice things about the EDU tier is it allows you to kind of explore the world and explore the work and the logistics of it all without, getting a job and like having to figure it out in order to keep the job, or even applying and interviewing and being like, oh, I'm not quite sure. Like this gives you an opportunity to easily and, for free, dip your toe into that. We got the free trial, so you can at least check it out, look and see, is this for me? Is this something that I think would be good for my future?
Very cool. Thank you both so much for being here today and for piloting this new series for us. We're excited to do more. Um, Thank you, Travis, again for like I learned a lot from actually about what you do and what your path has been like. Once again, for anyone who wants to check out the Falcon EDU license, we highly encourage you to do that. Very simple, just duality.ai/edu, and we'll make sure to have links to that in the description and in the comments. And always feel free to get in touch with us at any time. You can email us at edu@duality.ai. And if you're looking for how Falcon can be used for any of your bigger projects, solutions at duality.ai. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for me. If you guys don't have anything to add, we're going to say goodbye.
Yeah, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to be part of our community.